Om. Sahana vavatu, Sahanau bhunaktu, Saha viryam karavavahai, Tejasvinavadhitamastu, Ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. We will chant verses 25 till the end of chapter 5. Thank you, sir. Labhante Brahma Nirvanam Rishaya Kshina Kalmashaha Chinnadvaidhayatatmanaha Sarvabhutahite rataha Kamakrodhaviyuktanam Yatinam yatachetasam Abhito Brahma Nirvanam Vartate Viditatmanam Sparshan Kritva Bahirbahyan Chakshuschaivantare Bhuvoho Pranapanau Samau Kritva Nasabhyantaracharino Yatendriyamano Buddhihi Munirmokshaparayanah Vigatechhabhayakrodhaha Yah sada mukta yeva saha Bhoktaram yajñatapasam Sarvalokamaheshwaram Suhrudam sarvabhutanam Jnatva mam shanti mrichati. Hari Om and Namaskaram to everyone. '27 and '28 verse, which we did last week, gives us the procedural details to meditate. Shutting out external contacts, fixing gaze as though between the two eyebrows, equalizing the flow of incoming and outgoing breath in the nostrils, with senses, mind, and intellect control, having liberation as the goal. The sage, free from desire and anger, is verily liberated forever. Sada muktaha, ever liberated. So simple, so profound. I don't know whether these words are resonating within you, but they must have a certain influence in your thinking. As we have said time and again, meditation is a journey taken as a culmination of one's spiritual journey. It is the concluding exercise of your spiritual journey. When you don't keep that in mind and plunge into it, not only does it not give you the desired result, on the contrary, it has adverse effects. So people are taking a huge gamble, not realizing, not following the scriptural ordinance. I don't blame you. The gurus themselves are not following scriptural ordinance. So who are you and me? We just follow what the gurus have told us. Sadly, we are following whatever has been said without inquiring, without questioning. The least we can do is to find out, is this in accordance with the scriptures, scriptural ordinance, the order set by the scriptures, by the Shastras. You don't do that, you're taking a gamble. So in the 28th verse, he spells it out again, even when he is giving out the details of the actual practice of meditation. He says, ensure your senses are controlled, your senses are running wild behind the various sensual pleasures that it has to offer. The senses are running behind the world just to gratify the endless supply of the sense objects. So you have to get a hold of that rush towards the sense objects. Your mind, which is infested with various desires, various attachments, you're constantly worrying and anxious. You have to learn, you have to ensure that your mind is well controlled. Your mind is constantly active like your heartbeat. Your heartbeat stops, you die. Your mind stops, you realize. Your ego dies. It's a beautiful comparison. As long as your heart is beating, you're alive. As long as your mind is throbbing, your ego is alive. The moment the mind stops, you attain moksha, liberation. You know whether your mind is beating normally or your mind is, after you have climbed, let's say, few floors, how is your heartbeat? Or if you have just come after a little jog, what's your heartbeat? It is a very high pace, high rate, isn't it? So is your mind mellowed down? When your mind is calm, it doesn't rush. If your mind is introverted, matured, it doesn't rush into the world. An extroverted mind is like an increased heartbeat. So you got to ensure that your mind is controlled, your intellect is alert, and then you're sitting in meditation with the only objective of liberation, moksha parayana, with nothing else but moksha. You are suffocated with all that you are dealing with. You feel a sense of uneasiness. You just want to get out of this mess. You want to get out of this bondage. Enough of this samsara. I have had enough of it. Enough is enough. I have nothing to do with it. I just want to get out of it. I want to get liberated. So the desire for liberation, that mumukshatva is so strong that got you there. So you must understand it is the desire for liberation that brings you to this point of meditation, where you have given up every other dharma, sarva dharman parityajya, mamekam sharanam vraja, aham tva sarva papebhya mokshayishyami ma shuchah. In the 18th chapter, 66th verse, Lord Krishna says, Sarva dharman parityajya. You have to relinquish all your dharmas. No other interest. You relinquish every dharma, every vasana, every thought of yours. Mamekam sharanam praja. For my sake and surrender to me. Then he says, Aham tva sarva papebhya moksha ishyami masucha. I'll give you moksha. This is what here is saying. So you do that and then sit in meditation. With all your dharmas, which is all your vasanas, with all your attachments, with all your ego, with all your bondages, you sit in meditation. It is of no use. Either you lend me your ears or you have ego and arrogance of what you think is right. Hold on to it. Nobody, no man worth wisdom will try to change your understanding. The Shastras are saying, this is the truth. Take it or leave it. You leave it, is your loss. Better bow down to this Shastras, bow down to this Shastra Pramanam, the scriptural ordinance. So you got to renounce all your dharmas, mamekam sharanam vraja. And then the Lord says, aham tva sarva papibhya. Is exactly like we take the ritual of the coconut, when we take a coconut to a temple, we remove the coir, we leave that little tuft and take it to the temple, and it's the pujari or the priest that removes the tuft and breaks the coconut and offers it to the Lord. And then you're given the prasad, symbolizing realization. So why are you taking a coconut with just a little tuft? If you have put in so much effort and removed the entire coir, can't you remove the tuft also? The பெரிய ஃபேவரா பூஜாரி பண்றாங்க அந்த little tuft to take it out and throw it out and break it and give it to you? No, it's not. It is very symbolic, and this is the verse that conveys it. You go with that last few desires, or the last desire, the desire for liberation, you go to the guru, and it's the guru that takes care of that last desire, the last vasana, the last obstacle. The very desire to realize is removed by the guru. You can't do anything to it. It's like exactly like the gopis, they used to draw the milk, set the curd, churn the curd, save the butter, and they used to keep those butter in those pots of water. And what our little Undi Krishna did, he went and stole it away. So you put in all the effort and he takes it away. That's what he means. He gives you that freedom. You put in all the effort, he takes it away. He gives you that freedom. He gives you that result. He gives you that moksha. So you have to have it in the Shastras. If you look at it like a huge jigsaw puzzle, everything fits into the puzzle. You just can't take something out of it and fit somewhere else. That is what people are doing out there. If I were to start teaching meditation, if I were to start teaching all sorts of practices, without understanding the larger scheme of things, the grander scheme of spirituality, you just want to fit it in just because it's convenient, just because there's a market, just because there are takers. You're making a mess of it. I don't know. I wouldn't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Everything has a place. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. Everything has a place. And then also he says that sage have the liberation as the goal, and that sage is free from vigate cha bhaya krodha. He is free from desire, anger, and fear. Now, can you tell me, why should Lord Krishna, why should Vyasa put desire, anger, and fear even at the verge of meditation? Even at the point of meditation, he says, ensure that there is no desire, there is no anger, there is no fear. Anger is a modification of desire unfulfilled. Fear is a modification of desire fulfilled. So there is no desire and any emotion that arises, then only you're fit for meditation. So you find out what is your quotient, desire quotient in you, and what is the emotions that gurgle out of these modifications of desires. As long as they are there, you're unfit for meditation. I openly say I do not meditate because I know I am not qualified for it. I will not meditate. I may be able to keep my mind calm effortlessly. If I be with myself, I may be able to keep my mind calm, but yet I would not do it. I'm only preparing the ground. As I've said, spirituality is 99% perspiration. You've got to slog it out. You don't want to find an easy way out. Sit quiet and say Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Your mind becomes Shanti. I believe me, we would have had Mahatmas rolling out like burgers and pizzas. Our society would have been inundated with Mahatmas because of so much of meditation going on the world over. Don't make a joke of it, please. If there is that genuine effort, what you will get out of it is liberation. Don't do it for anything. Don't treat meditation as a balm to soothe your mental source. For God's sake, it is not a medicine to your mental source. It is a tool to attain moksha. Don't use it for anything other than that. And you do it when you're ready for it. When you're not ready for it, don't abuse it. Don't abuse it. Therefore, if you do it rightly so, you attain liberation forever, he says. Verily, you attain liberation. Now, the only thing I would leave you all with is a clear-cut definition for meditation. Okay, before I take up, there is this question Chinkima is asking, can one relinquish responsibility? Where did you ever gather that the Shastras are saying to relinquish your responsibility? Have you ever heard from me or anywhere in the scriptures? Then why do you ask that fundamental question? No.
Because you said just give up everything, surrender everything, you are suffocated. So a person who may be faced with a lot of problems might think, "Hey, ye to bahut ho gaya, bhai, ab now I want to try that path." It could be a form of escapism. Can it
Ayyo.
be?
No. I hope, please, glad you clarified. You are taking that statement, that phrase out of context. What I said is that a sadhak, a true seeker, is so disgusted with the worldly samsara, not out of not fed up. He has no value for it. He has no interest in it. He realizes the futility of it. He understands being caught up birth after birth in this bondage, punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam, punarapi janani, jatare shayanam, iha samsare bahudostare, krupaya pare, pahi murare. There is an appeal. I've spent in this mother's womb, born again and again. And I'm blessed that I have this thought to seek the higher, to urge to pursue the higher. So I want to hold on to this thought which is going to give me that salvation or moksha. So it is not that you are fed up. Sarvadharman parityaja. You're relinquishing sarvadharman. You're relinquishing your vasanas. Exactly the principle of renunciation. You can't relinquish your vasanas by relinquishing your duties. You relinquish your vasanas by attaching yourself to the higher. when you evolve to the higher, when you uplift your thoughts to the higher, the lower bondages and attachments are no more there. So it is
So,
never to abandon your actions, ma, please.
so can one say that when life is, great, everything is going perfectly, and at that period of time, someone says, "There's nothing in this," and I now, I want to, I've had enough. It suffocates me. But when somebody is in the midst of so many problems, responsibilities, whatever, at that point they could also feel, I think I've had enough, but that they cannot do. So it's in the midst of pleasure that you would actually feel suffocated enough to say I've had enough, or
Even a fellow who has overeaten in a buffet also says, Appa, I have enough.
both had.
Is
Correct.
that Vairagya? Is that
At that
Vairagya?
point,
That is
at that
not Vairagya. That is not Vairagya. Vairagya is you know that has
value of things as well.
it has no charm for you. You know, yesterday, family, we just went out for a little drive and we had a little time we spent in a mall where we intended to go. That destination did not inspire us. So Vaishnavi's exams were just finished. So we want to go out for a little drive. We went out, and then we were happy. We ended up at a place where we never intended. Ended up doing what we intended, but just a time well spent with the family. We just walked around in a mall for a couple of hours, and on the way back, there's this conversation, a quiet conversation between three of us, Vaishnavi, me, and Vijaya. We are having this conversation. The sentiment we were sharing was, it is so suffocating to be in luxury and comfort and pampering yourself and giving into the senses. It's the most suffocating thing. And then the question asked was, what is it that's the most satisfying thing in life? What is that you will never get tired? And the discussion we were having was, to live a life of sacrifice, to live a life of service is the most satisfying thing you will have. You will never get tired of it. But you will get tired of opulence, you will get sick and tired of comfort and luxury and indulgence. I'm glad I was not sitting and lecturing to them. I'm lecturing to you all now. But I'm glad in a casual atmosphere
This came out.
that came out from them, not from me.
Mm.
I felt so happy within me. And it just rubbed on to Vaishnavi as well. And she's sitting, and I didn't tell her to come and sit. She's come and sat today. She's there and she knows what the discussion is. I'm so blessed that thought came in their minds. I don't have to tell them to lead that life, you see. So when you have no value for the lower, that is when you will embark on life has another purpose. It opens up other avenues or paths for life. Otherwise, your life has a sort of a vicious pursuit. Everybody is caught up into something and believing that that's what life is. So it is not to give up anything. It is just to give up the hollowness in what you're doing. Realize the hollowness. Realize the emptiness. And as long as that is there, you can be right in the marketplace. Believe me, you can be where you are, like we were yesterday, and we just realized the hollowness and emptiness of everything. You may have to go to the market to pick up what you want, but just realize the hollowness there. We genuinely felt. In fact, uh, I don't know. I think we are going not because of the COVID. You know, I think we're walking into a mall just to spend. Happen to end up there. I think after 4 years, 5 years, we're just spending a decent time, and which used to be our uh, basic avenue for getting our needs back in Malaysia. Every other shop is like a huge mall there. Here you have to exclusively go, and just recollecting that and just that mindset, I said, man, what is it? It just, everything was so empty for us. That's how I felt. With everything displayed out there, with everything grand and glorious and glittering and dazzling, it doesn't have
any value for you.
Any charm for you, any value for you. And yet you can be with it. You can go and pick up what you want and pick up what your purse can buy. Don't overdo it. If your purse can buy that, go and buy that. And if you want it, go and get it. But understand, big deal. It is empty. It is really hollow inside. That you realize. Don't relinquish it. Realize the hollowness of it. So there's nothing out there that will make you feel wholesome. Should feel you wholesome, except yourself. Okay. And that's the state of mind is required. That's why I said you don't have to forcibly control the mind or the senses. Give the freedom, and yet the mind doesn't rush anywhere, because there's no thought, no desire, no craving, no urge. As he says in the earlier verse, in the 27th verse, he says there's no vega, that there's no yearning or desiring in your mind. Your mind is very calm, because there's no seed, so nothing will prop out. There's no desire, so the mind, nothing comes out of it. So then you will find you are ready for meditation. So when you are ready for a meditation, you must understand what is that principle. Even those who are meditating may not have, I'm not saying do not, I'm only saying may not have a clear picture. So it's worth just defining meditation. Now, meditation is defined as, Harishji, if you could kindly capture that as I say, so that people can take a note if they miss it. So meditation is an art of keeping your mind to a single thought. Meditation is an art of keeping your mind to a single thought or a chosen thought, to the exclusion of all other thoughts. Meditation is an art of keeping your mind to a single thought or a chosen thought, to the exclusion of all other thoughts, under one's governance of their intellect. Under the governance of their intellect is meditation. The art of keeping your mind to a single thought or a chosen thought, to the exclusion of all other thoughts, under the governance of their own intellect, is meditation. Now, why? The one thing you will find here is the intellect is mentioned here because it's the intellect that keeps the mind on the chant. When the intellect is not present while meditating, many people's intellect is not present while meditating. Why is intellect not present? Because they don't have an intellect. Not them. Many people don't have. The percentage of intellect is very poor. I'm not ridiculing. I'm saying, what is the percentage of intellect or wisdom? It's very poor, compared to the mind. I'm generally saying, so that we need to strengthen our intellect. That's what the Shastras and study does. But when the intellect is absent and the mind is going on its own, Srinivas Garu, are you following the questions? When the intellect is absent and the mind by itself goes on to something, what do you call that?
It is an absolutely uncontrollable situation.
Yes, you don't have control over the mind. Sir, when you have no control, your mind will be going here and there, isn't it? Everywhere.
That's, at least by bringing intellect, we can able to control, and we'll bring in back to the conscious
state. Yes. So you bring control over the mind and give it a channelize the thought.
Right?
Now, let's say, what my question is, okay, I'll ask you this fundamental question. Is it possible that the mind by itself will go in a particular direction without wandering? Is it possible?
Going in a specific direction?
Yes. As if it is governed by the intellect. The same result.
On its own, no, not possible. without applying intellect, because somewhere intellect is coming continuously on place to control the mind, because mind is start drifting to whichever may be there. Because when you start sitting for the meditation, you find hundreds of thoughts keep coming there.
I'm not talking of meditation here. I'm only asking, sir. You're very right when you say that. In meditation, many thoughts come because that's the very swabhava of the mind. A mind which has thoughts, many thoughts keep coming. It's natural.
Yeah.
It's like I go into my little garden and I suddenly see many shoots coming. Why are there shoots coming? Because I sprinkled a few seeds a few days ago. And I made sure I watered them, and suddenly, little kuti shoots come up. Why? Where did they come? Because there was a seed. If there was no seed, it's impossible for the shoots to come, isn't it?
Right.
Since you have the desires and vasanas, the thoughts will come. You can't do anything about it until you learn to handle it. Till then, it will come. So meditation is not going to help you to curb them or subdue them. It will come. So you have to try to wade them away and say, Shanti, Shanti. That is not the discussion, or the question rather. My question is, have you experienced, or is it possible that mind by itself doesn't wander? Where mind by itself goes in a particular direction. Is it possible? I think you said no. You're still with it? You're still with it?
Yes. Yes.
All right. Okay. Anybody else? Is it possible, Siddharaman sir, is it possible for the mind to stick to something without the intellect's supervision?
No.
You also stick no?
Yeah.
But if there is a strong, Hari Om Guruji,
Yes, Hari Om.
if there is a strong desire, maybe it will be channelized that time without the intellect. To attain that desire.
Is it so? You're saying it's possible?
If you have a strong desire, that desire can channelize your mind. Intense desire.
Intense desire keeps your mind on that particular pursuit. That's what you say.
Yes.
Then to that extent, it doesn't allow other thoughts to come and disturb it.
Yes.
You're very clear, I want to get that, and you're bullheaded. So the kind of mind just goes in the direction. So you say it's possible.
Yes.
All right.
Is that known as passion, Guruji? Passion.
Yeah, you can call it as passion, but passion is not temporary. Passion is measured over a long period of time. He says very passionate towards a particular activity, and that is not the nature of the mind. Because if you want to be I'm very passionate about the work I do. If I've devoted certain amount of time and I've chosen to devote rest of my life, it can't be just my excitement or my mental fascination for it. I may be fascinated with this knowledge, but if I have to pursue and construct my spiritual character, I need to have a very disciplined approach, which needs intellect, isn't it? But we are talking at a short moment. So it is possible there are moments where your mind doesn't think of anything. In fact, the moments where mind goes on its own without the intervention of the intellect, it is possible that the mind sticks to something without an external supervision. Such action where the mind goes on its own without the intellect is known as indulgence. When your mind is on something without intellect playing a role, you are indulging in it. You could be thinking of your Ishta Daivata. You could be thinking of your beloved. You could be thinking of the love for your grandchild. You could be indulging in nature. You could be listening to music. When you're sitting in a Carnatic concert, or you're sitting in a concert, you're enjoying the music. Don't tell me you're using the intellect to concentrate that music, that song. The song is for 40 minutes. starts from Alapana, the whole music and the accompaniments, everything, and it's a 40 minutes, the music. You don't tell me that all the audience who are enjoying the music they're all in the concert. But are they using the intellect? Are they concentrating? Can you use the word concentration there? They are not using the intellect. It is the mind that is so fascinated with the music they enjoy. They forget everything else and they just get stuck. So music is an emotional realm which serves and satisfies your emotions. So since you like, your mind is fascinated with it, it gets stuck to it. So you are actually not concentrating, you're actually indulging. You may have achieved the same, which is to keep the mind in the present, but you're actually indulging, you're not concentrating. You must know the difference. Just because the mind is there in the moment doesn't mean you're concentrating, please. Yes, Hariji.
Suppose I like the tune of a song. I may not even understand what the song is, but I get carried away and I get engrossed only in the tune, where the intellect has no role to play.
Correct.
So emotionally, I am after the tune. I will not understand anything.
Correct.
So, yes, mind can and mind will.
Yes. So, rightly said. You may be enjoying something which you don't understand. It is soothing, it's melodious, it's something comforting. You indulge in it. Like you go to a movie theater, you watch a movie, you enjoy the movie, those 2 hours, you forget every problem of yours, you forget everything, you just sit there. Have you been concentrating in the movie? But you're so engrossed. Srinivas Garu, you're so engrossed on the screen, what's happening? Are you concentrating? Your mind is so glued onto that happenings on the screen, you've forgotten everything. There is no worry and anxiety for those moments when you are in that realm of indulgence. Now, sir, kindly unmute yourself. So I think now you can, I suppose.
So we can call that as also part of a meditation, because it's been singly focused on one action. You're totally disconnected with the intellect and you've been really making a difference to your mind without intellect coming in the way. So meditation is the one where we're talking about focusing on a one single point of action, either taking away thoughts, or when we have been seriously involved in the listening to the music or to the movie or going through the movie, all rest of the thoughts have been vain.
Yeah, this is.
So can we call it
also? This is what people are calling as meditation. I'm so glad I wanted to define it. I didn't define it, and I'm defining it this moment. Last week I didn't define it, and I wanted to capture that. The crux, the real takeaway, the real qualification is under the intellect. I'll explain myself. Even though you may have achieved the same objective of maintaining the single thought or the chosen thought.
Right.
The chosen thought can be your grandchild. The chosen thought can be your beloved. The chosen thought can be looking at nature. You can be sitting next to a brook. You can be looking at a valley or a mountain and you get just so engrossed, enchanted by it. Just start looking at it, or listening to music or anything which catches your mental fascination. Mark the words. Anything that catches your mental fascination, the mind will get enamored, it gets fascinated with it, and then it starts indulging. That is the thumb rule for any indulgence. It is your mind's liking to it.
It also can be reading a book, sir.
Yes, very much. If that be so, if you like something, you're enjoying it, you're doing it, but you may not be concentrating. Concentrating is a conscious process. Indulgence is an unconscious process. It happens effortlessly. You need to put in a lot of effort to concentrate. Like, for example, just over an hour, a half an hour has passed. If you have to follow what is going on, you have to have a fair level of concentration to be there in this class for the last half an hour. Your mind has not wandered, means you have a very healthy level of concentration. But if you have allowed yourself to be distracted or allowed the mind to wander, means your intellect has not kept the mind in the moment. Now, you may ask me, sir, why are we doing such a hair-splitting analysis of this? Why is it is easy to indulge? That is what people are doing in meditation. They are just indulging. They get lost. It could be you can get lost in the thought of your guru. You can get lost in the thought of the deity. You can get lost into some chant or some music or something you hold on to. That is indulgence. Now what happens is, sir, what is the purpose of meditation? What is the purpose of meditation? Rajima, what is the purpose of meditation?
To stay focused on self-realization. A calm mind?
No. What is the purpose of meditation? Subramanyam Garu.
Hariom Guruji.
Hariom sir.
The focus of meditation, I feel, Guruji, is to know myself, to know who I am, to go inwards.
No. What's the purpose of? I'm. Also when you all start talking, I think we should just skip the greeting part because it distracts me. Not you, anybody. You get on to talking, just get on with the subject. No namaskar, no hariom. That's the reason I have said namaskaram, hariom to you all in the beginning. You all have said an end there. Because I'm so focused in that every word and thought matters, and that even hariom is derailing me. I hope you understand how serious the study is. It's a laser pointed I'm trying to point out. So please be mindful. I'm not that I will, in a day I might tell hariom 1,000 times, but at this moment it is not required. Yes, Srinivas Garu.
In my view, we do the meditation just to get the peace of mind.
Sir, I am told the current approach to meditation is a mockery.
I mean to say,
I am only asking at the real meditation. So I'm only trying to explain the verse. Please understand that. I'm not trying to judge anything or pass remarks. I'm only trying to explain what the verse is saying. To differentiate, I'm still going with the definition and differentiating it with indulgence. So in the real sense of the meditation, why does a person sit and meditate at that stage? He is at the almost short of pinnacle of perfection, sir. One stage short of perfection is meditation. Why is that person doing meditation?
To connect divine.
All right, connect with the divine. All right.
With the ultimate focus in place so that you want to get connected to the divine.
You're not wrong. Yes, but it doesn't really get what I'm saying. Why does one meditate? See, a person meditates to get rid of the last desire, which is the very desire to realize. Meditation is the process which gets rid of your last thought or the desire, which is a barrier between you and God. Therefore, you don't meditate until you reach that state. Oh, it's done. It is there for that purpose. You can use it. It has a certain benefits, but you don't get moksha, liberation out of it. It may calm your mind. Carry on doing it. I'm not saying nothing against it, but this is the Shastras are saying it is done at that stage because meditation alone uproots that last thought, the desire. So meditation is done to get rid of the last obstacle between you and God. So now come to the difference. When the intellect is absent, one is indulging. Correct? Srinivas Garu?
Yes.
Are you all following me? So when the intellect is absent, when the mind goes on its own because of a certain fascination, it is called indulgence. Now, when your mind flows by itself and when you indulge in something, what is the outcome of that? When you indulge in something, you actually create new desires. You are strengthening and reinforcing your existing desires. So indulgence creates desire, strengthens a desire, but with the intellect, you get rid of the desire. When your mind flows on something, when you're indulging on something, when your mind is fascinated with something, you keep remembering it. What happens? Are you not adding fuel to fire? Are you not giving into the desire? Are you not strengthening it? Are you not worshipping the object you want? Here we want to drive the desire. In the name of meditation, you're only indulging there. Therefore, a strict definition which the Shastras give is the intellect must be present. So it's a very, very conscious, concentrated process where the intellect is actually holding the mind in firm control. The mind doesn't go anywhere. The mind is just on the chant. Just keeping the mind in that chant. And as the chant is continuing, it is trying to elongate the silence between the chant, so that you are trying to get into that groove of silence. I chanted and showed you all last week. First, you start by saying Om, 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 Om. And slowly you start increasing the silence between the chant. Om, Om, Om. So do you see the silence? And then comes a point where there's only silence. Even the chanting stops. And then you just sit completely silent, not outside silence, please. Your mind has become silent. There is no more thought. The very thought of Om will not come because the desire has dried away. The desire has died away. And when that last desire is also uprooted with the chanting of that meditation or the Om, in that silence, you attain realization. That's why I said, when your heartbeat stops, you die. When your mind stops chanting, your ego dies. In that moment, realize. And the last thing that goes is intellect. First, mind dies. Mind is a desire. Mind stops chanting because there's no desire. Mind dies. And the intellect has no job because it needs a pair to function. Since there is no mind, there is no opposite, intellect also becomes extinct. Mind extinct, intellect extinct. You attain realization. And this is captured, this experience is captured in the Shastras. There's only one verse which captures this experience. What happens at realization? There's only one verse in the entire Shastra, chapter 2, verse 53. 53rd verse of chapter 3 captures this immaculate, or that exquisite, that fine moment. What happens at that verge of realization? 53rd verse, chapter 2 captures it. And then you have to surrender to the commentator whether he has done justice to that substance, whether he has done justice to that essence which is captured, conveyed there. It's a very, very serious path and a very serious exercise. And the results are there to be seen if you do it in the right right way with great caution. I'm only trying to bring in a lot of caution into this exercise, please. And I think we all should respect that. Okay. Yes, Hariji.
This is what we exactly learned in the last Atma Bodha class.
Which is it? Which is?
That where the intellect becomes extinct.
I did not explain that last Atma Bodha class.
We touched it.
Touched it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
I have written in my
yes,
takeaways.
Yes, yes. Okay. Yeah. But Hariji, there are people here who may not attend the Atma Bodha class.
Oh.
So you may want to be mindful of that. You know, I know there's nothing wrong in what you are saying, but it's just that others would be lost. You know, just keep that in mind. Okay, perfect, sir. All right, we'll take up 29. भोक्तारं यज्ञतपसां सर्वलोकमहेश्वरं सुहृदं सर्वभूतानां ज्ञात्वा मां शान्तिमृच्छति भोक्तारं यज्ञतपसां सर्वलोकमहेश्वरं सुहृदं सर्वभूतानां ज्ञात्वा मां शान्तिमृच्छति Bhoktaram, knowing me as the enjoyer of yajna tapasa, of sacrifices and austerities. Suhrudam sarvabhutanam, sarvaloka maheshwaram, the great Lord of all words. Suhrudam, I'm your friend of all beings, the friend of all beings. Jnatva mam shantim ricchati. He attains peace. Samapt. The end. Finished. Chapter close. Knowing me as the enjoyer, the me means the Atman, enjoyer of sacrifices and austerities. Bhoktaram yajnatapasam. What it means is you will reach Brahman, you'll enjoy the Brahman or Atman through the path of yajna and tapaha. When you perform yajna and tapa, you get to that glory, you get to that state of me, the Atman. You'll enjoy the bliss of the Atman through yajna and tapaha. Now here he only mentions two. They're actually thought. There are three things. Anybody remembers? Anybody knows what are the three things? In fact, they are said to be the pillars of spiritual path. The pillars of spiritual, the foundation of the spiritual journey. The very edifice. The two are yajna and tapa. What's the third thing? Those of you who have read the Gita would know. Gita, we are reading the Gita only, no? No, read the Gita elsewhere. Later part of the Gita, it is said, those of you who have had the exposure, it's not a test to you all. I'm only trying to tell you in the context because it has a significance. Anybody wants to take a guess? Jyotsnama, are you there? You said you, I think I saw you earlier.
Guruji, I'm here.
Namaskaram.
Namaskaram.
Yes.
My guess is devotion.
I knew you will say that. All right. No, it is, in fact, it is not devotion, but good try. Some are saying Shraddha, Jnanam, sense control. No. Yes, Sudhakar Garu, what is the three pillars?
Karma Yogam, Bhakti Yogam, and Jnana Yogam.
Sir, Sudhakar Garu, I already said two pillars. The two pillars are, what is it? Yajna and Tapa. I'm asking the third pillar. Now you're giving Karma, Bhakti, Jnanam. Which pillars are these? These are the three paths. I'm saying that the very foundation of your spiritual personality. Your spiritual personality grows when you have these three pillars, the foundation stones, as it were. Dharma, Gayatri Ma says, consistency. Harish ji, guess kijiye. Saraswati Ma says meditation. Illa ma, very sorry. Meditation illa. Discrimination, no. Attitude of renunciation, japa, no. Higher purpose in life, no. Vichara, no. Neti, I'm just rejecting neti, not this, not this. That's all I'm saying. Not this. The 3-4 qualities we got to develop is
surrender.
Hariji, no. Who is this Sri Hari Kasala? Huh? Who is this Sri Hari? Please. Can you show yourself?
It's not.
Yes, sir.
Sir, Hari Om Guruji. I'm Sri Hari.
Yes, sir. Enna sonninga, what did you say?
Dana, sir.
My namaskارams and prostrations to you. You have got it. The third is Dhanam. Yajna Tapa Dhanam. You forget rest of the Shastras, you forget scriptures, you forget Gita, forget meditation, forget everything. If you just practice these three, Yajna Tapa Dhanam, you can build a spiritual skyscraper on it because this is the foundation. The Burj Khalifa, the tallest skyscraper in the world, you can double the size on it, you can build spiritual skyscraper because this is the foundation, the three pillars. And he only mentions here, so I wanted to bring the third. Wonderful, sir. It is the Dhanam. Very good, sir. I'm glad.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Guruji.
Yes, sir. Glad you got it. Lataji, utna you just because you put it so much, you think the answer is going to come through, huh? G. So many G's you put. I don't know what was the Mukshatva G. I can't even say so many times.
No, actually, it was already there. I was in a hurry. It was already printed by mistake.
No problem. But no problem. Little lighter note.
I was in a hurry to pass on the message.
Shanti, ma. Nobody is going anywhere. Till 12:45, I will not go anywhere. 12:45 I'll disappear. Saringla? ठीक है माँ? Yajna, Dana, Tapa. Now, just for you all to fall back on the reference or the source, it is in the 17th chapter of the Gita. Yajna, Tapa, Danam. And each of it is classified into Sattvic, Rajasic, Tamasic. Sattvic Yajna, Rajasic Yajna, Tamasic Yajna, verses 11, 12, 13. I'm giving you the references so you can go and read. You can fall back on the text. 11, 12, 13, Sattvic, Rajasic, Tamasic Yajna. And interestingly, Tapaha, he classifies Tapaha under austerity of the body, austerity of speech, austerity of mind. Fabulous, fabulous definition of what is austerity at the body level, austerity at the speech level, austerity at the mind level. And he says all these three is Sattvic austerity. So austerity of body is 14, austerity of speech is 15, austerity of mind is 16. So 14, 15, 16 is the Sattvic austerity, which is 17. Rajasic austerity is 18. Tamasic austerity is 19. And Dhanam, Sattvic, Rajasic, Tamasic, 20, 21, 22 respectively. So from verses 11 to 22, by heart this, grapple it to thy soul, as Shakespeare says, grapple it to thy soul with hoops of steel, he says, you know. Am I right, Harishji? Grapple it to thy soul with hoops of steel. Hold on to it. This is very dear. Yajna, Tapa, Dhanam. What is Yajna? Yajna is to convert one's mundane, materialistic, meaningless actions into divine worship. When you convert your mundane action into worship, it is Yajna. Yajna, no doubt, is that age-old ritual of fire worship, but it is just not the mere physical yajna you perform, where you do the yajna amidst the Vedic chanting. How to convert every action into worship? How do you convert your talent when you offer your talent as an ahuti to the common cause you work for? That spirit of converting your action to a common cause is yajna. I can be a manager, I can be a managing director, I can be a clerk or a peon, but I do that in the larger interest to serve our organization. That action either can be done to merely gratify one's own selfish ends, or it is done to serve a larger cause, which is to shoot the flame of the organization. The organization must grow. And when the organization grows, what happens? Every member of the organization is benefited. But if every member of the organization is trying to consume the resource of the organization selfishly and self-centeredly, what will happen? There is no more the organization. There's no more the banner. But if everyone brings their talent, each one has a talent, use the talent as an offering to the Lord, as an offering to the cause, to a larger cause, that is yajna. So when you perform that yajna, with no desire or fruit in mind, enjoined by the scriptural ordinances, such yajna is sattvic. So opposite of yajna is just aggrandizing, acquiring and hoarding. I want the best of houses. I want to have the best of furniture. I want to have the best of holidays. I want to have the best of everything in life, which means I must keep on acquiring and acquiring and acquiring. This greed, wanting more and more, that desire for more and more. you live a life opposed to yajna. So opposed to yajna is a life of aggrandizing and hoarding. Then the next is tapaha, austerity. The opposite of, what is the opposite of austerity? Srinivas Garu, I'm asking you with a purpose, for a reason.
Sorry, Guruji, I could not get connected.
The
austerity.
The second is austerity. Tapaha is austerity. My question is, what is the opposite of austerity? What is the opposite of tapas?
The purpose, no.
Are you familiar with the word tapas?
Yeah, familiar, but I'm not able to get the meaning exactly for it.
Okay, no problem. What is the opposite of doing tapas? Opposite of tapas is not opulence, ma. How Shama, you are saying? So Vaidyanathan said opulence, right? Ushama, I said indulgence. Yes, you're right. Correct. The opposite of leading a life of tapas or austerity is a life of indulgence. Now, why I asked you, Srinivas Garu, is earlier to the question, when the intellect is not present while meditating, your mind is indulging. So the answer is the same. Therefore, I said I'll get to you. So it'll stick with you. So when a person is trying tapas, so tapas has two essential ingredients, two essential aspects in practicing tapas. Tapas, one leads a life of tapas, is you conserve your mental energy. You conserve it by leading a life of strict discipline. You adhere to a very disciplined life, a very methodic, very cultured, very consciously withdrawn life, so that you curtail mental dissipation of energy, and having got that mental energy at your end, you redirect it to something higher. For example, if I don't socialize, I'm not saying you shouldn't, please. Let's say a person doesn't socialize as much. What does it do? It leaves him with so much time at his end, where he could use that time for some other activity. But let's say if a person is interested in socializing, it takes so much of his time planning, programming, enjoying, unwinding, and it eats into so much of his time. His life has gone devoted to socializing. But if I'm not saying it's wrong, please, but for me, it's a complete no-no. It's never been a no-no. Yes. It's always been a no-no. I've never been a social man. I would never socialize for the sake of socializing, not required. Unnecessary. I found it unnecessary. I would never attend function right from young age, never been a party goer, never attended functions. I have no interest in it. So what happened is I found there's so much time you get wasted in such an activity. So the moment, if you withdraw, what happens? You are mentally available. Then what do you do with the time? You redirect that energy towards higher thought. Perhaps I read the scriptures, I go to bed early, I can be available for my activity. I am more inclined towards to optimizing my time, energy, and resources, rather than just being available for the people. They may be interested in socializing. In fact, I had a student who brought up this challenge. He said, my wife is a great socializer. She socializes, she wants to. I am not, and I'm torn because I have to go with her. And I will go and sit in the corner, one corner, You greet, and then how long will you greet? Like, there's nothing much to talk. There's no common subject matter interest in us, because her friends or family, they're all involved in the family circle, the friend circle. They have a certain interest, and it's not in my mind. So I said I would be just sitting there waiting for her to finish and give the green signal. Chalo, let's go back. I'll then tag along with her and come back home. And weekend after weekend, every now and then used to happen, and I used to feel sick within myself. Why am I doing? What am I doing? Until slowly he could get out of that, and he said, oh my God, what a blessing it was. Not that he didn't want to be with his wife, it's just that that activity is such a dissipation of energy. So you have to understand, you got to realize what are the activities that actually dissipate your energy, and practice tapas. Extreme example of tapas is Harishji, any idea? Extreme example of tapas? How we actually have to relate tapas to. Extreme example. But you don't have to follow it, just to convey the message I'm saying.
Is it the stories that we hear of the great rishis who kept meditating and anthills were formed around them? And
absolutely correct. Just completely cut off from the world. They were lost in some deep woods where anthills, literally anthills, were built. You know, even those ants never realized that this is a living being. You know, they were just so still, so engrossed. Anthills were built around. That kind of complete cut off from the world. What would be the power and grandeur of those people who could practice such intense tapas? Intense tapas. Phew. Ushama, please don't tell it is sleep. Andava. தயவு செய்து சொல்லாதீங்க ப்ளீஸ். ஸ்லீப் தப்பஸ்னா அதில் நம்ம எல்லாம் அதுதான் பண்ணணும். Let's all get into sleep. So that capacity to withdraw from an activity you find is mentally dissipative. Think of the higher. That is, I'm not going into detail. I'm giving you the references. Please go through the references. You'll find the division of austerity of speech, austerity of body, austerity of mind, and sattvic, rajasic, tamasic austerities. He spent 6 verses on it. And then lastly is dhanam. Yajna, tapah, dhanam. Dhanam is to do charity. It is not that you are doing charity because you have something excess with you. It's not because you have excess you're doing charity. Why should you do dhanam? What is the very purpose of doing charity? Figure it out, explore it, examine it. So the verse is saying, having known me as the enjoyer, means you will get to that joy of Brahman through yajna tapah dhanam. You become the supreme lord of the world, sarvaloka maheshwaram. When you become the lord, you don't demand anything. You become the commander, the supreme commander. Because you have got to that Atman, that Brahman. The Brahman is a supreme commander. It controls and commands everything. He is a friend of everything, every being. Friend is someone who gives solace and comfort and happiness. What is it that gives you comfort and solace and happiness? Rajima?
Sorry, Guruji, I have not been paying attention.
That is the reason you were pulled up. Like a teacher pulls up, I have the joy of pulling up a principal. How many students have you pulled up in your career? Huh? What a joy I get pulling up a principal. I can't share. My heart swells with joy. I'm very sorry. I know you are not. But at least what are we talking?
What gives you solace and peace?
Ah, very true. What is it that gives you solace, peace? See, he says, I am a friend to you. Suhrut, Suhrudam. So what is it that, what is a true friend? Now, what are we talking about here? When I say a friend, the two things here we're talking about. One is not, one is. So what are the two things here? Any guess? My job in this classroom is not to inform you all. That you will have many sources to be informed. My job is to make you think in a protected channel so that you are guided in your thinking. And the only way I can do that is by a dynamic interaction, by questioning you all and helping you all think along, keeping the text in mind. It's a very specialized process. You may not understand how precise and how scientific this process is. It is very easy for me to explain and just keep going. I would finish the text in 1/3 of the time, but then I'm only transferring information onto you. So this is the reason I'm questioning every now and then there is this discussion. He says, Suhridam, that which gives you comfort, solace, and happiness. What's the two things you have to choose from? The two things are, is it the world that gives you the comfort, solace, or happiness, or is it the Atman, the self, the reality that gives you comfort, solace, and happiness? So what is it that gives you comfort, solace, peace, and happiness? Rushing out into the world or turning inward within? Is there any doubt in the answer? Undoubtedly, it is the self. And how to get to the self? Yajna tapah dhanam. You will become the enjoyer, you will become the Lord, you will become the Maheshwara. Such a person, Shanti Bruchati, he will merge with the self and attains that Shanti, that peace, that happiness. I only feel a total sense of satisfaction. What a text. The satisfaction you get is you have attempted to go as close as possible to what was intended to convey. And a great effort is put in, not to bring my opinion to it. You may not know it. The effort is to just convey what they conveyed they meant. And it's a great satisfaction. And it's not easy. It's a lot of effort goes into it just to bring that out. So the concluding section, please. Can we have that Sanskrit section? Yes, sir. Thank you. Om Tat Sat Iti Srimad Bhagavad Gita Upanishatsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade Karma Yogo Nama. Is it Karma Yogo Nama? Karma Sannyasa Yogo Nama Panchamodhyayaha. Karma Sannyasa Yoga. Is it possible to have the first verse, sir, please? The first verse.
I'll try, Guruji. Just give me a few minutes. I'll try to bring it up.
Sure. The tradition we always follow is we chant the first verse after the completion of the text, just to remind ourselves that, just to humble ourselves that it is not the end, but just a beginning. And you would never have fathomed it. You can never have completely understood it, because it's like a gold mine. the deeper you go, it has something yet to offer. It is not just to play with words, please. It is that real essence and spirit we're looking for. And that's what is conveyed when you chant the verse again. So let's please all chant the first verse of the text of the chapter once together. Arjuna uvacha sannyasam karmanam Krishna punaryogam cha shamsasi yachreya yetayorekam tanme bruhi sunishchitam. So with this, the fifth chapter is complete. The fifth chapter was entitled Karma Sannyasa Yoga, the yoga of renunciation of action. Please, I request you all, advise you all to go through the text right from the beginning, review it in the course of the next few days so that you can recall and capture what was said so that you can reflect and contemplate. We will come back next week. We will begin the sixth chapter. And interestingly so, after all this, as you know, it's a continuity. Each chapter is a continuity. And it's a conversation between Lord Krishna and Arjuna. And then a thought flow, which concluded in this chapter, flows into the next chapter. The next chapter is titled Dhyana Yoga, which is yoga of meditation. It is going to be a very beautiful journey where you will get to see the inner aspects, what he talks of meditation and how it all fits into our sadhana. All right. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om.